Thing we're going to talk about is what tax does to a total. So does tax add to a total or does it take away from a total? Tax adds to a total. It makes your total go up at the end, so you end up having to pay more. Do tips add or take away to the total? Tips also add to the total. At the end, you pay more to tip somebody. And then discounts, do they add or take away from the total? These take away from the total. When you get a discount, you expect to pay less, and so you have to subtract so that you pay less. So the first one says the Kerwoods went out to eat at Chili's. If their bill was $58.65 and they gave their server a 15% tip, how much did they pay altogether? So when it gives us a percent, we are dealing with a part over whole equals percent over 100. And this is because they gave us the percent this time, so I would have to go through and calculate change anyways, so we're just going to do this. So, do I know my part or do I know my whole? In this case, I know my whole because the total of the bill was $58.65. And then my percent was 15. So I would have X over 58.65 equals 15 over 100. I solve proportions by cross multiplying, so I do X times 100, which gives me 100X. And then I would do 58.65 times 15, which gives 879.75. And then what do? I divide both sides by 100. That gives me a really weird number. It gives me X equals 8.7975. But we're talking about money. Money only goes to 2 decimal places. I think I might have messed up on something. Hold on. Just kidding, I did not mess up. Money only goes to 2 decimal places. So that means that I have to round this 9 right here using this 7. Now this 7 is going to make that 9 go up or stay the same. It's going to make it go up. But 1 up from 9 becomes 10. So I write down a 0 and then I carry this 1 right here. And that gives me $8.80 that would be left behind as a tip. Now, tips add to the total or take away from the total? Tips add to the total. So I take my total, which is $58.65, and then I add the tip to it. And that would give me $67.45. For the next one, it says Mrs. Atkin spent $205.60 at Target. If the sales tax is 6%, what was her final bill? So the first thing I see is that it was a percent. So I go through and I set up a part over whole equals percent over 100. I know that she spent $205.60. So is that a part or a whole? That is a whole because that is her total that she spent. Then I also know that we have a percent, so that goes right there in the percent spot. So I would have X over 205.60 equals 6 over 100. Now I cross multiply, so I do X times 100, which gives me 100X, equals 205.6 times 205.60 times 6. And that's going to give me 1,233.6. Now at this point, I go through and I divide both sides by 100. And that's going to give me X equals 12.336. Now, remember, this is money, so we round to the nearest hundredth. And does that 6 make that 3 go up or stay the same? That makes it go up to 12.34. This is a tax. Does a tax add to or take away? This adds to the total. So I would do 205.60 plus 12.34. And when I add that all together, that's going to give me 217.94. This one says Macy's is having a one-day 35% off special. If Sarah bought $124.50 worth of items, what would be the final bill after applying the discount of 35%? Well, I see a percent, so a percent means I set up a proportion. So I have part over whole equals percent over 100. How would you set this up? We would have 124.50 as the whole, because that is the total, and we would have 35 as the percent. So I would have x over 124.50 equals 35 over 100. I cross multiply, so I would do 100 times x, which gives me 100x. And then I would do 124.50 times 35, and that gives me 4,357.5. At this point, I would go through and I would divide both sides by 100. And that's going to give me x equals 43.575. Here, I would round to the nearest hundredths place. Now that 5 is going to make that 7 a 8. So I would have 43.58. At this point, I would say, okay, am I working with the tax, tip, or discount? Well, in this case, I am working with a discount. And does a discount add or subtract from the total? The discount subtracts from the total. So I would take my total, which was 124.50, and I would subtract off 43.58. And that is going to give me 80.93. That should actually be 92. Sorry. Okay, this one says Mark and his 3 friends ate out at Applebee's. Their bill totaled $52.35. If they left the server a 20% tip, how much would each person pay, splitting the bill equally? First thing we're going to do is we're going to break this down into 3 parts because there's a bunch of different stuff happening here. The first thing I need to do is I just need to figure out what they left behind as a tip. So that is going to be a part over whole equals percent over 100. Now, I don't know what my part is, so that's going to be x because I don't know what my tip is. I do know that my total is 52.35, and then I know that my percent is 20. So I would have x over 52.35 equals 20 over 100. And then I would solve this by cross multiplying, so I would have x times 100, which gives me 100x, and then I would have 52.35, and that gives me 507. Now, I divide both sides by 100, and that gives me, I hit the wrong button on my calculator. This should be 1,047.4. Sorry about that. Okay, now I divide both sides by 100, and that's going to give me x equals 10.474. But remember, this is money. So I round to the nearest hundredths place. So what is that 4 make that 7? It stays a 7 because 4 is less than 5. Now, it's a tip, so does it add to the total or does it take away from the total? Tips add to the total. So I would do 52.35 plus 10.47. And when I add that together, that's going to give me 62.82. Now, it wants to find how much each person would pay because it says how much would each person pay if splitting the bill equally. So, what would you do to figure out how much each person would pay? We would divide. When we split something equally, that means we are dividing. So I have 62.82 divided by, now what number am I going to divide by? I would actually divide by 4 because it says Mark, which is one person, and his 3 friends. So that makes a total of 4 people. So I would do 62.82 divided by 4. And that is going to give me 15.71. This one says a soccer team played 32 games and they won 25% of them. So how many games did the team win? So I would go through and I would say, okay, I know they played a total of 32 games and they won 25% of them. So that means I need to do a part over whole equals percent over 100. I don't know how many games they won, so that's going to be x. I do know they played a total of 32 games, and I know they won 25 of them. We solve by actually, hold on, let me set this up. And then we solve by cross multiplying. So I have 32 times 25, which gives me 800 equals 100x. Divide both sides by 100. And that gives me x equals 8. The next one says sugar-free gum contains 40% less calories than regular gum. If a piece of regular gum contains 40 calories, how many calories does a piece of sugar-free gum contain? So first we need to find out how many calories have been taken out since it says 40% less calories. Since it's a percent, I have a part over whole equals percent over 100. I don't know how many calories have been taken out, but I do know that it contains a total of 40 calories and that it's 40%. So I have x over 40 equals 40 over 100. We solve by cross multiplying. 4 times 4 gives me 16, and then I tack on my 2 zeros, so that gives me 1600. And then I have 100x. Divide both sides by 100, and that cancels out these zeros, which leaves me with x equals 16. Now, I need to figure out how many calories are in the sugar-free gum. I know that it contains 16 less calories, so how do I figure out how many calories it contains? I would do 40 minus 16, which is going to give me 24. On the next page, it says Amy is decorating. Oh, no, that's not the next page. I'm sorry. Okay, on the next page, it says Anna bought a jacket on sale for $48. The store was having a 25% off sale the day she bought the jacket. What was the original price of the jacket? So she bought it on sale. It wants to know the original price. So we'll talk about what that means in a second. First, let's just figure out how much money was taken off. Actually, just kidding. We're not going to do this question. Okay, just given that one. This one says this is his monthly budget. So he spends $1,200 on rent, $250 on groceries, $625 on his car payment, $225 on utilities, $300 on entertainment, $200 on savings, and $150 on emergencies, and $200 on clothing. And it wants to know the minimum amount of money he has to earn to meet this budget. So if he spends all of this money every single month, how much does he have to earn in order to have like literally no money left over? Like how much does he spend every month? So to do that, I would add all of this up together. And when we add all of it up together, we would figure out that he spends a total of $3,150 every month. So that's the minimum amount of money that he has to make to have none left over. Now, he makes that month every month. It wants to know, he spends that month every month. It wants to know the minimum amount of money he must earn annually to meet this budget. Now, annually means yearly. So when we ask ourselves, okay, well, how much does he have to make yearly? We have to know how many months are in a year. So how many months are in a year? 12. So how do we figure out how much money he has to make in a year? Well, I would do 3,150 times 12. And that's going to give us a total of 37,800. The next one says, the circle graph shows Sierra's monthly budget. Her monthly income is $5,500. It wants to know how much money does Sierra spend on transportation each month. Well, if we look over here at transportation, I see that she spends 15% of her budget on transportation. So if we see a percent, what do? We set up a proportion. We have part over whole equals percent over 100. I'm looking for how much she spent on transportation, so that's going to be X, and my whole is going to be how much money she makes, which should be 5,500. The percent is going to be the transportation, which was 15. So I would have X over 5,500 equals 15 over 100. We solve by cross multiplying, and that's going to give me, for 5,500 times 15, it would give me 82,500 equals 100X. Because we cross multiplied there. Divide both sides by 100, and these zeros cross out, and that leaves me with $825. The next one says, how much money does Sierra spend on housing and food each month? So I'm going to look over here, and I see that she spent 28% on housing. And then I look over here, and I see that she spent 18% on food. And it means that we add those together to see the total amount that she spent. And so we would figure out that she spent 46% of her monthly income on housing and food. Now, that's a percent. It wants to know how much money. So what would we do to figure out how much money? We would set up a proportion. So we have part over whole equals percent over 100. I don't know how much she spent on housing and food, but I do know that she makes a total of 5,500. And I know that she spends 46% of that on housing and food. So I have x over 5,500 equals 46 over 100. We solve by cross multiplying, so I start by doing 5,500 times 46, which gives me 253,000 equals 100 times x, which gives me 100x. I divide both sides by 100, cross off those zeros, and that tells me that she spent $2,530 on housing and food. And the last question says, while grading quizzes, Miss Wimberly noticed that 120 students that took the quiz, 96 students scored a 90 or above. What percent of students scored a 90 or above? So it's looking for a percent, which means I either set up a part over whole or a change over original. Did the number of students taking the quiz change? No, so we're doing a part over whole equals percent over 100. Now, what would my part be? How many students scored a 90 or above? That would be 96 students out of how many total? 120. I don't know the percent, so I'll put x there. So I have 96 over 120 equals x over 100. We solve by cross multiplying, so I do 96 times 100, which gives me 9600 equals 120 times x, which gives me 120x. Divide both sides by 120. These zeros cross out, which leaves me with 960 divided by 12, which gives me a total of 80%.